I never thought my own daughter would turn against me like this, but sitting in that courtroom, watching her attorney stand up and declare me mentally unfit, I realized how wrong I'd been about so many things in my life. My name is Robert, and I'm 52 years old. I've spent the last 30 years building a successful real estate portfolio in Colorado, working 12-hour days to create something meaningful for my family. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really mattered. My daughter Sarah is 31 now. She's always been ambitious, always wanted more than what I could give her growing up. When her mother and I divorced 15 years ago, Sarah chose to stay with her mother most of the time. I respected that choice, even though it broke my heart. I sent child support, I paid for her college, I helped her put a down payment on her first house. I thought that showed her I cared, that I was being a good father despite the distance between us. But Sarah saw it differently. She saw money, she saw opportunity, and more than anything, she saw my estate. Last year, I was diagnosed with mild hypertension. Nothing serious, nothing that affected my cognitive abilities or my ability to manage my affairs. My doctor was clear about that. But when I mentioned it casually to Sarah during one of our increasingly rare phone calls, something shifted. She started calling more frequently. She started asking detailed questions about my finances, my properties, my investments. She suggested I move closer to her. She suggested I see a therapist. She suggested a lot of things, but what she really wanted was control. 3 months ago, Sarah filed a petition in court claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my own assets. She alleged that my hypertension was affecting my judgment. She claimed I was making reckless financial decisions. None of it was true, but the paperwork was official, and suddenly I was in a position where I had to prove my own sanity to a judge. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my home office, surrounded by the files and documents that represented decades of hard work. I thought about all the times I'd sacrificed for my family. I thought about the birthday parties I missed because I was closing deals. I thought about the soccer games I skipped to make sure the mortgage was paid. I thought about choosing work over presents and how that choice had created this distance with my daughter. But I also knew the truth. I knew that my mind was sharp. I knew that my financial decisions were sound. I knew that Sarah's allegations were born from greed, not concern. The courtroom was cold and impersonal. Sarah sat at the opposite table with her attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s who had clearly been briefed thoroughly. Sarah wouldn't look at me. She kept her eyes forward, professional, detached. That hurt more than any words could have. Her attorney presented the case first. She described my medical condition in vague, manipulative terms. She suggested that my real estate transactions over the past year showed signs of deteriorating judgment. She painted a picture of a man losing control of his life, of his mind slipping away. It was a masterpiece of deception, and I could see the judge considering her words carefully. Then it was my turn. My attorney, a competent but not particularly aggressive man named David, stood up and assured the court that I was perfectly capable. He referenced my medical records. He talked about my business acumen. But something was missing. There was no real evidence. There was no voice that could cut through the doubt that had been so carefully planted. I looked at the judge and saw uncertainty in his eyes. That's when David leaned over and whispered something that changed everything. "Your doctor needs to be here," he said. "The judge needs to hear directly from Dr. Patterson about your condition. We need physical evidence of your mental competency, not just my word." My heart sank. Dr. Patterson was in Phoenix. Getting him here would take time we didn't have. The judge was about to make his decision. But then something unexpected happened. The courtroom doors opened. Dr. Harold Patterson walked in, briefcase in hand, his gray hair and professional demeanor commanding immediate attention. He looked at me with a knowing nod, and I realized that my assistant had made the call. She'd reached out to him after I told her about the hearing. She'd explained the situation, and he'd driven 5 hours to be here. The judge's expression changed. He recognized that this was serious now. He recognized that I wasn't just making claims. I had evidence. I had a professional witness. I had someone willing to stake their reputation on my mental clarity. Dr. Patterson was sworn in. Sarah's attorney tried to undermine him, but he was unshakable. He described my medical condition in precise clinical terms. He explained that hypertension, when managed properly with medication, had absolutely no impact on cognitive function. He detailed the comprehensive mental health evaluation he'd conducted just weeks before the hearing. He presented data, test results, and professional observations that painted a picture of a man in full control of his faculties. But the most powerful moment came when David asked him directly, "Dr. Patterson, in your professional medical opinion, is Robert capable of managing his own assets and making sound financial decisions?" Dr. Patterson looked directly at the judge and said, "Not only is he capable, he's one of the most cognitively sharp men I've evaluated in the past 5 years. His mind is sound, his judgment is clear. Any suggestion otherwise would be medically inaccurate and, frankly, irresponsible." The room went silent. I saw Sarah's attorney lean back in her chair, recognizing that the momentum had shifted. I saw Sarah finally look at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than confidence in her expression. I saw doubt. I saw the possibility that her plan might not work. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked at me, then at Sarah, then back at the documents in front of him. "It's clear to this court," he said slowly, "that there is no medical evidence supporting the petition for guardianship or asset management. Dr. Patterson's testimony is conclusive. The petition is denied." He banged his gavel, and the case was over. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. But as I descended the courthouse steps, Sarah caught up with me in the parking lot. She was angry now, no longer hiding behind professionalism or courtesy. The mask had come off. "You embarrassed me in there," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. "You made me look like a gold digger in front of everyone." I stopped and turned to face her. In that moment, I realized something crucial. I wasn't dealing with the little girl I'd tried to provide for all those years. I was dealing with a woman who felt entitled to my life's work, who believed that my earnings were somehow rightfully hers. "Sarah," I said calmly, "I'm not going to apologize for defending myself. And I'm certainly not going to apologize for having a sound mind and the ability to protect what I've built." "What you've built?" She laughed bitterly. "You mean the life you chose work over me for? Those properties and investments, they're supposed to be my inheritance. That was always the plan." "The plan was for me to build a better life than the one I had," I replied. "The plan was never for me to be manipulated or for my daughter to betray my trust to speed up a timeline that wasn't hers to control." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was already thinking about what came next, how she might salvage this situation. "I'll be contacting an attorney about contesting your will," she said coldly. "I'll fight this in every way I can." "You do what you need to do," I said, "but know that from this moment forward, things are going to change. I'm changing my life, I'm changing my priorities, and I'm changing how I relate to people who've shown me their true character." I got in my car and drove away from her, standing alone in that parking lot. That evening, I sat in my home office and made a series of phone calls that would reshape my entire future. I called my attorney and updated my will. I established a charitable foundation in my name that would support scholarship programs for underprivileged students studying business and real estate. I set aside a modest inheritance for Sarah, enough to show that I hadn't disowned her entirely, but not enough to reward her behavior. More importantly, I called my ex-wife Jennifer. We hadn't spoken in years beyond logistics about Sarah, but I needed her to understand what had happened and why. "I know Sarah came from our marriage," I told her carefully. "I know some of her feelings about money and security might stem from seeing us struggle through the divorce. But I also know that what she tried to do today was calculated and deliberate. I needed you to hear that from me directly." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. "I've been worried about her for years," she admitted. "She's always been focused on money, on status, on what things cost rather than what they mean. I thought maybe it was just a phase, but it's not a phase," I said. "And I think we both need to accept that she's made choices about who she is. We can't make those choices for her." Over the following weeks, I began the process of genuine transformation. I hired a life coach to help me understand the patterns that had led me to distance myself from my family in pursuit of financial security. I realized that my workaholism had been a way of avoiding emotional intimacy, of proving my worth through accumulation rather than presence. I started taking time off. Real time off. I took a 2-week trip to Costa Rica alone, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't checking emails or taking calls. I sat on beaches and watched sunsets and allowed myself to feel the weight of my own life without trying to build something on top of it. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my years of constant work. I volunteered with a local non-profit that helped young entrepreneurs get their businesses off the ground. I found myself in conversations that mattered, in relationships that had depth beyond transaction. 3 months after the courtroom victory, I received a letter from Sarah. It was brief and cold. She informed me that she would be challenging my will through her attorney. She claimed that my recent behavior, the charitable foundation, the time off work, the life changes, were all signs of cognitive decline. She was going to try the same strategy again, just with a different angle. I read that letter and felt something I hadn't expected, sadness rather than anger. I felt sad for her, for the woman my daughter had become, for the choices she'd made and the bridges she'd burned. I called my attorney immediately and instructed him to document everything. My ongoing mental evaluations, my business decisions, my charitable work. I wanted a complete record of my cognitive clarity and my intentional life choices. But more than that, I decided to do something that surprised even myself. I reached out to a mediator and invited Sarah to a session where we could talk, really talk, about what was happening between us. To my surprise, she agreed. We sat across from each other in a neutral office with a professional mediator between us, and Sarah finally articulated what was really going on beneath all the legal maneuvering. She was scared. She was scared that I would die and leave her nothing. She was scared that without my money, she wouldn't matter. She was scared that all those years of distance meant that I didn't really love her. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter as a person rather than an adversary. I saw someone who had internalized the message that love was transactional, that worth was measured in dollars, that security could only come from accumulation. And I realized that I had taught her that. Through all my years of choosing work over presence, through all my decisions to prove my worth through financial success rather than emotional connection, I had shaped her into this person who equated love with inheritance. "I do love you," I told her in that mediation session, "but I won't be blackmailed for it, and I won't pretend that love means giving you control over my life. Real love means boundaries. Real love means telling you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." She didn't respond immediately, but I saw something crack in her expression, a small opening where vulnerability appeared beneath the anger and calculation. "I don't know how to fix this," she said quietly. "Neither do I admitted. "But I know that it starts with both of us being willing to see each other as human beings rather than as sources of what we need." The weeks following our mediation session were uncertain and fragile. Sarah didn't immediately transform into the daughter I'd always hoped for, but something had shifted. She agreed to start family therapy with me, and while those sessions were often uncomfortable and sometimes painful, they represented a willingness on both our parts to understand each other differently. In therapy, I learned things about Sarah's childhood that I'd been too preoccupied to notice. She remembered the birthday parties I'd missed not as opportunities she'd understood, but as confirmations that her father didn't prioritize her. She remembered watching her mother struggle financially after the divorce and developing an almost visceral fear of instability. She remembered me sending checks instead of showing up, and how those checks had become the primary language through which she experienced my love. Our therapist, Dr. Amanda Morrison, helped me see that my recent life changes weren't just about me anymore. They had to be consistent, demonstrated, and proven through action over time. Sarah had spent 31 years learning one version of who I was. She couldn't unlearn that in a few weeks of therapy sessions. Your daughter needs to see that you're not just taking a vacation from work, Dr. Morrison explained to me during one individual session. She needs to see that you're fundamentally restructuring your priorities, and more importantly, she needs to experience the results of those priorities. She needs to feel like she matters more than your properties or your portfolio. I took that feedback seriously. I reduced my real estate involvement to minimal oversight. I brought in a property manager to handle day-to-day operations. I cleared my calendar for the next 6 months with one exception. Family time. Not obligatory family time squeezed between business calls, but genuine, present family time. I started having dinner with Sarah every Wednesday night. We'd meet at different restaurants around Denver, and at first these dinners were awkward and stilted. We didn't have much to talk about beyond the surface level, but gradually something changed. Sarah started opening up about her own life, her own struggles. She was working in marketing for a tech company, a job she hated, but stayed in because of the salary. She was dating a man who treated her poorly, but she stayed because he was successful, and that felt familiar. As I listened to her, I heard echoes of my own patterns reflected back at me. She was choosing security and status over happiness and authenticity. She was staying in situations that diminished her because she was afraid of the alternative. She was, in essence, becoming me. One Wednesday night, as we sat in a quiet Italian restaurant overlooking downtown Denver, I finally said what needed to be said. Sarah, I want you to know something. The choices I made when I was your age, the prioritization of money over relationships, the fear of instability, the belief that accumulation equals security, those were choices I made from a place of fear. And I've spent 30 years learning that those choices don't actually create what they promise. They create isolation. They create distance. They create a life that looks successful from the outside, but feels hollow on the inside. She looked at me across the table, and I could see her defenses were down. She was listening, really listening. I don't want that for you, I continued. I don't want you to spend the next 30 years building something that doesn't actually nourish your soul. I don't want you to look back and realize that you prioritized the wrong things. And I don't want you to stay with someone who doesn't appreciate you just because he has money or status. But what if I need security? She asked, and I heard the fear underneath her question. You do need security, I said, and you deserve it. But real security doesn't come from external things. It comes from knowing that you're capable, that you're valued, that you matter regardless of your bank account. And I'm going to show you that, starting now. Over the following months, I became involved in Sarah's life in ways I never had before. I helped her create a financial plan that would allow her to leave her job and take 3 months to figure out what she actually wanted to do. I helped her examine her relationship with her boyfriend and eventually gave her the support she needed to end it. I introduced her to people in my network who could help her explore new career paths. But more importantly, I was simply present. I showed up. I called her just to talk, not to discuss logistics. I listened to her problems without immediately trying to solve them. I let her see a version of her father that was human, vulnerable, and genuinely interested in her life beyond what she could inherit from him. Around month 4 of this transformation, something unexpected happened. Sarah called me on a Tuesday morning, which was unusual. We had established Wednesday dinners as our consistent connection point, so an unscheduled call immediately caught my attention. "Dad, I quit my job," she said without preamble. My first instinct was to panic. I'd built a financial safety net for her, but I also knew from experience that quitting a job without another one lined up was risky. "How are you feeling about that?" I asked carefully, trying not to project my anxiety onto her decision. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also relieved. I've been so unhappy, Dad, and listening to you talk about these past months, about how you're restructuring your whole life, it made me realize that I don't have to stay in a situation that makes me miserable just because it pays well." "I'm proud of you," I said, and I meant it completely. You're making a choice based on what's actually going to serve your life, not just your bank account. That takes courage. During her 3 months off, Sarah discovered that she was genuinely passionate about urban development and affordable housing initiatives. She started volunteering with a non-profit that specialized in this work, and by the end of her sabbatical, they had offered her a position as their community outreach director. It paid less than her previous job, but it aligned with her values and it made her happy. The night she accepted the position, we went out to celebrate. As we toasted with wine, Sarah looked at me and said something that changed the entire trajectory of our relationship. "I think I finally understand why you did all those things," she said. "Why you missed so many things trying to build your empire. I think you were trying to make sure I'd never have to be afraid like you were, but what I'm realizing now is that the greatest gift you could have given me wasn't money or security. It was presence. It was knowing that I mattered more than your business." I felt tears form in my eyes. "I wish I'd understood that sooner," I said. "Maybe you needed to learn it the hard way," she replied. "Maybe we both did." As we sat in that restaurant, I reflected on the journey we'd been on. The courtroom victory hadn't been about me proving my mental competency. It had been the catalyst for something far more important, the opportunity to rebuild a relationship that had been fractured by my own choices decades earlier. But the work was far from over. Sarah still struggled sometimes with her old patterns. She still had moments where she reverted to calculation and skepticism, and I still had moments where I wanted to retreat into work when things got uncomfortable. But the difference was that now we were both aware of these patterns, and we were both committed to breaking them. My attorney eventually received notification that Sarah was withdrawing her second legal challenge to my will. The letter explained that she and I had reconciled and that she no longer believed those allegations were valid. It was a quiet acknowledgement that she had been wrong and that she understood why. I updated my will again, but this time with very different intentions. I left Sarah a substantial inheritance, not because she'd earned it through manipulation or because I was trying to ensure her loyalty, but because I loved her and I wanted her to have the freedom to make choices based on her values rather than financial desperation. I also left detailed letters explaining my life, my regrets, and my hopes for her future. The real victory, I realized, wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the slow, difficult, beautiful process of becoming the father I should have been all along. 6 months after Sarah's new job started, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. I decided to significantly downsize my real estate portfolio. I sold 3 of my 5 properties and used the proceeds to expand my charitable foundation's work in education and affordable housing. The properties I kept were the ones that brought me genuine joy. A cabin in the mountains where I could retreat, my primary residence in Denver, and 1 investment property that I actively managed myself as a hobby rather than a business. My friends and colleagues thought I was crazy. They couldn't understand why a successful businessman would voluntarily reduce his empire. But they didn't understand what I'd learned through this entire experience, that accumulation without purpose is just noise, and that a life built on legacy alone is ultimately unfulfilling. The announcement of the foundation's expansion generated some media attention in Denver's business community. Several publications ran stories about my transformation, and while I was uncomfortable with the publicity, I recognized that it could serve a greater purpose. The foundation received increased donations, and more importantly, it inspired other business leaders to think about their own legacies beyond pure profit. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Jennifer, Sarah's mother. We hadn't spoken in years beyond necessities, but she wanted to thank me for the positive influence I was having on Sarah. She told me that Sarah had been visiting her more frequently and that their relationship had improved significantly. She also shared that she'd noticed the changes in me and that she was genuinely impressed. "I remember why I married you," Jennifer said with a slight laugh. "Before the work consumed you. Before we both lost sight of what we were building together." "I'm sorry it took me 30 years to remember that," I replied. After we hung up, I sat in my office and allowed myself to feel the full weight of that apology and that recognition. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't get back the years I'd spent prioritizing the wrong things, but I could change the future, and I was doing that every single day. Sarah and I established a new tradition. Every Sunday afternoon, we would hike together in the Colorado mountains. These hikes became the foundation of our new relationship. We didn't have agendas, we didn't have business to discuss or logistics to manage. We simply walked, talked, and existed in each other's presence. On these hikes, Sarah shared her dreams for her nonprofit work. She talked about wanting to develop sustainable housing models that could be replicated across the country. She talked about the satisfaction of work that mattered. I shared my own fears and regrets. I talked about the emptiness I'd felt despite all the financial success. I talked about the relationships I'd damaged through my absence. I talked about the strange freedom that came from letting go of the need to constantly build and accumulate. One Sunday, about 9 months into our restored relationship, as we were reaching the summit of Mount Bierstadt, Sarah stopped and turned to me. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "All the changes you've made? Do you ever wish you'd just kept doing what you were doing?" I thought about the question carefully. "No," I said honestly. "There are moments where I miss the adrenaline of a big deal or the satisfaction of closing a complex transaction, but I don't miss the person I was when I was doing those things constantly. I don't miss being absent from the people I love. I don't miss the hollowness." "I was going to sue you again, you know," Sarah said quietly. "After that first hearing, I had a whole plan. I was going to try a different angle, a different strategy. But watching you actually change, actually prioritize me, actually show up, it made me realize that what I really wanted wasn't your money. It was my father." I pulled her into a hug, and we stood together on that mountain overlooking the Colorado landscape, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Peace, not the false peace of accomplishment or accumulation, but the genuine peace that comes from being truly known and truly loved. The courtroom battle had been about protecting my assets and my autonomy, but the real battle, the one that mattered, had been internal. It had been the struggle to release control, to admit failure, to accept vulnerability, and to reconstruct my life around what actually nourished my soul rather than what inflated my ego. As I stood on that mountain with my daughter, I realized that I had won something far more valuable than any legal victory. I had won back my relationship with Sarah. I had built a foundation that would outlast any property portfolio. I had created a legacy not of accumulation, but of presence, authenticity, and genuine connection. Looking back, I can see that the petition for guardianship, while painful and infuriating in the moment, was actually a gift. It forced me to confront the reality of who I'd become and who I wanted to be. It gave me an opportunity to rebuild from the foundation up. The courtroom had been the catalyst, but the real transformation happened in the ordinary moments. It happened in Wednesday dinners, where we actually talked. It happened on Sunday hikes, where we shared our authentic selves. It happened in the quiet conversations where I finally listened instead of lecturing, where I admitted my mistakes instead of defending my choices, where I chose presence over productivity. As we began our descent from the mountain, Sarah took my hand. She was an adult woman, a professional, a person building her own legacy, but in that moment, she was also my daughter, and I was exactly where I needed to be, not in a boardroom or a courtroom, but beside the person who mattered most, walking through life together. That's when I truly understood what the doctor's report in that courtroom had really proven. It wasn't that my mind was sound. It was that I still had the capacity to change it, to redirect it, to use whatever intelligence and capability I possessed toward building something real and meaningful. The legal victory had been sweet, but this connection with my daughter, this rebuilt relationship, this transformed life, this was the only victory that would ever really matter.